No one saw him walk away. No alarms went off. No warnings were given. But what he was carrying could have crushed anyone. Some chosen ones retreat not out of fear, but because they've reached the edge of something no one else can see. Their presence begins to slowly fade, and the world, too distracted by noise, only notices when the silence has already become absence. Many say he disappeared, that he shut down, that he changed. But they don't understand that what left was the part of him still trying to stay where he was never truly welcomed. When a chosen one falls silent, it's because something sacred is trying to survive. It's not an escape, it's spiritual protection. And when that retreat happens, it's not just him who leaves. The energy leaves, the bridge leaves. The thread that held life together in that space quietly slips away. Have you ever felt something like that? A presence that faded and without a word left everything different? Maybe that crossing was yours too. Maybe you walked away as well. And to this day, no one knows what you faced. But now, you're going to remember. Most believed he left because he couldn't take it anymore, that it was cowardice, pride, weakness. But it wasn't any of that. When a chosen one disappears, it's almost never because of something you can see. Because what drove him away wasn't a single event. It was a buildup, an overflow of perception, a weight that only those who feel deeply can carry, in silence. Before he left, he tried. He tried to explain himself. He tried to belong. He tried to be understood. But the environment wouldn't listen. His words hit invisible walls. The nuances got lost. And every time he opened his heart, he came back with a little less strength. Because there are places not meant to receive someone who vibrates on a different frequency. What wore the chosen one down wasn't the battle, it was the loneliness of fighting where no one sees what's going on. It was saying the same thing over and over, only to be heard in the most shallow way. It was feeling everything, and not being felt in return. It was watching his energy drain slowly, through eyes that didn't know how to read him, through words that sounded like listening, but didn't heal. And then he stopped. Not like someone who gives up, but like someone who finally understands that some battles aren't won by staying. They're won by leaving, by going quiet, by healing in a place where body and spirit can hear each other again. The disappearance of a chosen one is not abandonment. It's a right, a realignment, a calling from the unseen that whispers, you no longer need to stay where your light is treated like it's too much. And maybe, now you understand. Before the retreat, something begins to shift, but almost no one notices. There's small signs, signs that don't shout, they only whisper. The chosen one begins to go quiet during conversations that once made him light up. He feels his body present, but his soul somewhere else. Words lose meaning. Gestures become mechanical. Intuition grows louder, but finds no space to be heard. Exhaustion shows up where there used to be excitement. Lighthearted company starts to feel heavy. Familiar places begin to feel strange, and everything seems to ask for a pause. But from the outside, it makes no sense. Because the chosen one still smiles, still answers, still shows up. But he's no longer there. It's as if the spirit begins emptying the space before leaving. As if the vibration gently pulls away, preparing the body for the crossing. And no one sees it. No one asks. Because the signs are subtle. And the world is too distracted to notice what's subtle. What many call distance is actually a silent request for energetic respect. What they interpret as a sudden change is only the result of having ignored the signs for too long. Because the chosen one never leaves all at once. He leaves in fragments. First with the eyes, then with the heart, and finally with the vibration. If you feel that this crossing Wasor still is yours, write in the comments. I too needed to walk away in silence. Maybe someone, reading your untold story, will recognize themselves too. And maybe you felt it. Maybe you still feel it. That nameless discomfort. That presence slowly fading without saying a word. And you, have you noticed the signs too? Not all silence is absence. Some are journeys. The soul doesn't give notice when it begins to change. It just grows quiet, pulls back its sound, lowers its frequency, and creates space inside so something new can be born, even if On the outside, everything still looks the same. That's how it begins, with small silences no one understands, gentle withdrawals that need to not respond, not be there, not go on. The world sees it as apathy, but really, it's preparation. The chosen one isn't running away. He's listening to something that can only be heard when everything around him goes quiet. The pain wasn't escape. It was transition. It was the skin peeling from within to make way for a new vibration. And that no one sees. During that journey, words lose their meaning. Explaining no longer works. Justifying becomes useless, because something is shifting in the field and it no longer fits in the words of the past. The body is still here, but the spirit is already elsewhere, redirecting, clearing signals, releasing what no longer resonates with its truth. Many don't understand. They think the chosen one got lost, that he disconnected. But what's really happening is the opposite. He's reconnecting in a deeper way, only this time, without witnesses. The journey begins like this, in silence, invisible. While everyone else goes on with their lives, the chosen one walks through inner portals no one will ever see. And hurt becomes fire. A fire that doesn't burn on the outside, but transforms from within. And it's right there that he begins to disappear. Not because he's giving up, but because he's being reborn. What happened after that no one saw, because the chosen one didn't scream. He didn't fall apart in public. He didn't ask for help. He simply stepped back. And it was there, far from everyone, that the real crisis began, not in the body but in the vibration. The layers that once held him up began to quietly fall apart. Beliefs, images, words, everything that kept him standing started to crumble from within. But it wasn't visible. It was energetic. An internal collapse where the soul tried to reorganize without the noise of others' expectations. There were days when he felt like an emptiness with legs. Others, when the weight was so heavy, he could barely breathe. The synchronicities disappeared. Intuition fell silent. The body still responded, but the soul was nowhere to be found. The connection that once guided him faded away, and the world became a distant echo. And it was within that echo that he had to find a new sound, a new point of reference, because all the old signs no longer worked. What once held him up no longer did. What once brought peace now brought unease. What once was faith became silence. He wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for solid ground, something to hold him together on the inside while everything outside was falling apart. But no one noticed, because the true journey has no spectators. It takes place where only the spirit can reach. Some would call it depression, others an existential collapse. But in the spiritual field, it has another name: vibrational reset. A deep beginning that requires the disappearance of everything that was just noise. And maybe you felt it too. And only now are you beginning to understand what it was that you lived through. When everything around you goes quiet, something begins to stir inside. At first, it feels like abandonment, a heavy silence, total absence. But little by little, the chosen one begins to realize that he's not in a void, he's in a sacred space. That loneliness so many fear is, in truth, a vibrational chamber where healing settles in without a sound. It's there, far from the noise, that the field begins to restructure. The mind slows down. Emotions, once scattered, begin to gather. And the soul, which had been buried under the weight of overstimulation, can finally breathe. In that space, with no interference, no expectations, no judgment, what once felt like pain becomes alchemy. Solitude isn't punishment. It's spiritual medicine. It's the space between one life and the next. The place between who the chosen one was and who is about to emerge. And that silent chamber cannot be seen, but the one who enters it knows, feels it, because something shifts. Old memories disintegrate. Attachments lose their grip, and a new frequency begins to settle in. He's no longer trying to understand what happened. Now, he's allowing it all to happen. He's sitting with the pain, accepting that he doesn't need to explain or correct himself. He just needs to be there, present, with everything that he is. It's at this point that the chosen one begins to truly see himself, not through the reflections of others, not through the distortions of the past, and for the first time in a long time, he feels peace. Not a loud or euphoric peace, but a peace that pulses in the quiet, one that says, you no longer need to run from yourself. This is where healing begins. Not everything that feels like abandonment is absence. Sometimes, what you thought was spiritual neglect was actually a field of quiet observation, because there are moments in the journey of the chosen one when even the signs go silent. No answers, no visible presence, just the void, just the silence, just the journey. But the universe is never truly absent. It simply steps back, so you can see yourself clearly. It's in that gap between collapse and rebirth that silent justice begins to act. Because the universe doesn't reply with words. It replies through the field, through resonance, through realignment. You thought you were alone, but you were being closely accompanied. Every tear was noted, every thought heard, and every invisible act of strength was honored in a language only vibration understands. What looked like forgetting was deep attention. That's the part most people never understand. In their darkest hour, the chosen one believes he was abandoned. But the truth is the opposite. The universe needed him to walk that stretch without crutches, without shortcuts, without distractions, because only then would he discover the power that had always lived inside him but was still asleep. You thought it was abandonment, but it was divine observation. And now, the universe is beginning to give back, not with noise, but with flow, with reconnection, with clarity. The waiting ends when the frequency aligns, and maybe you're already starting to feel it. It was in what he didn't say that he found his own salvation. In the midst of the silent collapse, there were questions that never got answered, provocation at no reaction, stories he could have told, but chose to hold. And within that silence, there was strength. It's not always what we say that connects us. Sometimes, it's what we choose to keep quiet that protects us. Because every word carries a frequency, and by not speaking them, the chosen one prevented his pain from becoming food for spaces that wouldn't know what to do with it. What he lived wasn't suppression. It was energetic discernment, a sacred pact between him and his soul, a silent agreement. Not everything must be shown. Not everything needs to be proven. And within that pact, he was saved. Some words open portals, but some, if spoken too soon, break the shield. The chosen one sensed that healing needed a sacred space, protected, untouched, hidden, and silence became that protection. His vibrational armor. He could have explained everything. He could have shared it all. But he knew that in doing so, he might open himself too wide, and maybe wouldn't have the strength to come back. So he chose to hold it. And in that holding, there was no loss, there was preservation. What he didn't say, the universe understood and held it for him. Because not all healing is spoken. Some happens in the field. Vibration speaks louder than any word. The spiritual field doesn't scream when it's wounded. It simply fractures. And those who are sensitive can feel it but almost never know how to explain it. The chosen one began noticing these signals after opening up too much. After sharing sacred truths with people who didn't have vibrational listening. Words spoken at the wrong time. To those who couldn't hold the sacred. And that was when the membrane began to give way. The aura, that living layer that protects the most delicate parts of the self, became porous. Tiny cracks formed. And through them, not only energy escaped, but fragments of his own essence. Unripe parts. Exposed vulnerabilities. Internal codes revealed before their time. At first, it just feels like exhaustion, a subtle fatigue after a conversation, an invisible discomfort. But soon, the signs start to build. Intuition falters. Dreams become unclear. Synchronicity is lost. Energy doesn't return. Something begins to slip away, and the chosen one feels it. The crack can't be seen, but it resonates. The soul knows when something precious has been exposed carelessly. because anything revealed without the right field to hold it, scatter sand, takes a piece of light with it. This is how the spiritual field responds. With silence, with imbalance, with a frequency that can no longer hold its shape. That's when he understood. Not every relief is healing, not every moment of sharing is love, and not every connection is compatibility. There are vibrations that orb, and when that happens, there's no holding, only emptiness. The broken membrane doesn't send a warning, but once it breaks, nothing vibrates the same again. The chosen one tried to explain. He tried to translate what he felt, to name what he didn't even fully understand himself. But the more he tried, the further he drifted from who he was. Because there are processes too deep for words, and every attempt to translate the invisible risks profaning the sacred. The energy that once pulsed strong began to dissolve in explanations. What used to be presence became narrative. What was intuition turned into justification. And each time he shared his pain with someone who didn't know how to listen, it was like stepping outside of himself. Not every silence needs to be broken. Not every feeling needs to be spoken. Trying to explain a deep journey is like opening a cocoon before the butterfly is ready. It may look like care, but it's a rupture. It steals from the soul its right to live what it must without an audience, without translation, without distraction. That's when he understood. Trying to explain is the beginning of being lost, of disconnecting, of aligning with other people's doubt instead of his own truth. And maybe you felt that too. That feeling of leaving a conversation as less than you were when you entered, less centered, less you. There is a strength that only grows in silence, and a self that only blooms when you decide to stop explaining. All that time, they thought he had drifted away, that he had given up, that his absence was abandonment, escape, or weakness. But it was none of that. He never disappeared. He just stopped being where he was no longer seen as a soul, but only as a role, a reflection, a projection. The chosen one didn't retreat out of fear. He refused to stay where his energy was being drained without return. He stepped away to preserve himself, to protect what was still growing within. And contrary to what they all thought, it wasn't the end. It was preparation. In the silence, he wasn't absent. He was realigning, adjusting the field, clearing the excess, giving new meaning to the pain, replacing old codes with new ones. He withdrew from the world so he wouldn't betray himself, because to stay where everything vibrated in dissonance would have been to abandon himself from within. No one saw when it began, because vibrational change always comes before any external decision. Before he left physically, he had already gone energetically. His frequency no longer matched. His soul was already in another room. And that's why so many didn't understand, because they tried to find him with their eyes and couldn't. But what changed? The access point. He no longer manifests at the surface, he lives in the field. He no longer seeks physical presence, he vibrates. And where that vibration is welcomed, he remains. Where it isn't, he stays quiet. That's the rupture, the breaking of the old story, the end of the idea that walking away means abandoning, the end of the logic that says being together requires being physically close, because the chosen one never truly disappeared. He simply stopped being accessible to frequencies that no longer hold what he was becoming. While everyone thought he was losing himself, he was being rebuilt, internally, spiritually, in silence. And now, something in his presence has changed. It's not noise, it's field. It's not physical presence, it's energetic expansion. What he did wasn't hiding. It was fulfilling an invisible mission to protect what was not yet ready to be offered to the world. When the chosen one returns, there is no announcement, no speech, no show. Because his return doesn't happen in words, it happens in presence. A new vibration begins to fill the space, and those who are sensitive can feel it. The field shifts, the air changes, the energy stirs. There is no explanation, only a silent knowing. Something has returned, but different. He doesn't need to justify where he's been, or rebuild bridges that couldn't support his journey. Because the one who returns is not the same as the one who left. He's someone else. More whole, more grounded, more silent too. The return doesn't come with noise because there's nothing left to prove. His frequency speaks for him, and those who didn't understand him before now feel him. Not because he explained, but because his vibration, now clearer and fuller, carries a truth no words could reach. He no longer needs to be accepted, because he's no longer trying to fit in. He simply returns to the space that was always his but now, without losing himself in the process. The return is subtle, yet absolute. It's not reconciliation. It's reconnection with what is above, beyond, ahead. And that is what few truly see. The return of the chosen one is a silent affirmation that he never truly left. He simply had to go so he could return as truth. The same silence that once went unnoticed now unsettles. The presence that was once overlooked is now felt from a distance, not because he changed to get attention, but because he stopped hiding, and his vibration, unfiltered, no longer fits where he once tried so hard to belong. Now, he no longer dims his tone, no longer softens his light, no longer dulls what he feels to make others stay. And that, for many, is uncomfortable, because those who couldn't hold his pain now don't know what to do with his power. Those who got used to his broken version don't recognize this new wholeness. He didn't return seeking approval. He came back carrying presence, and true presence unsettles those who only knew how to deal with masks. That's why some pull away, others watch in silence, and some even criticize, as if his new vibration were a threat. But what unsettles them isn't him. It's the mirror he's become. The chosen one now pulses at a different frequency, one that reveals the imbalance of others without speaking a single word. He does not judge, but by merely existing, he exposes, and that is unsettling. Maybe you've noticed it too, that once you reconnected with yourself, certain people simply drifted away, as if your presence revealed what they weren't yet ready to see. And that's not rejection, it's resonance. It's the field doing its work, and the work now is to keep going. The chosen one learned something few truly understand. Over-explaining is the first way to lose your own energy. That's why he stopped. He stopped convincing, stopped showing, stopped translating what can only be felt. He understood that there are moments when silence is the only true answer, because there are people who aren't ready to listen, and others who don't want to understand, only react. Justifying yourself to them is handing over your vibration to a field that cannot hold what you've become. The chosen one doesn't argue, he feels, and he moves according to what resonates, even if that means being misunderstood. Because someone who lives in alignment with their essence no longer needs to prove anything. And maybe that's one of the deepest truths born from the journey, the ability to remain whole, even without being understood. To keep going in silence, even when questioned. To hold your frequency, even in the face of other people's doubt. He no longer seeks acceptance. He lives in peace with who he is, and that is enough. There comes a moment in the journey when the chosen one stops being only someone who survived and becomes someone who vibrates beyond pain. That's when he's no longer seen with the eyes, but felt. Because now, he is enlightened. The enlightened one doesn't need to impose or explain. His existence is his affirmation. His vibration says more than any explanation ever could. He's not looking for approval. He stands in truth. And because of that, he doesn't compete. He doesn't compare. He doesn't try to convince anyone. His consciousness no longer depends on external reflections. He walks lightly, even while carrying depth. And wherever he goes, something shifts. Not always visibly, but it's always felt. The enlightened one doesn't need to prove anything, because he knows that what is true doesn't need to be defended, only lived. And the way he lives now is, in itself, a frequency that transforms. Maybe you're feeling that same calling, to stop explaining, to stop chasing, to simply be. Because when that truth arrives, everything that once felt urgent dissolves, and what remains is presence. Whole, calm, real. You don't notice it right away, But suddenly, something shifts. Morning comes gentler, thoughts clearer, and a peace you haven't felt in a long time begins to settle into the spaces where doubt once lived. It's subtle, almost invisible, but real. The field is returning. Intuition reappears like a familiar whisper. Decisions flow more easily. Answers arrive even before the questions are asked. And the body once tense, without explanation, now breathes differently. That's the first sign. Reconnection has begun. You run into someone you hadn't seen in a long time, and the encounter feels destined. An old project starts moving again. Words you needed to hear arrive unexpectedly. And everything that once seemed stuck starts to move. These are not coincidences. They're signs. Synchronizations returning. But it's not chance. It's frequency. Because now, with the field clear and your essence aligned, the universe can find you more easily. The energy that was once scattered is now focused. And what once felt like effort now flows. The enlightened one does not force. He aligns. And when the field aligns, life responds. Because the universe always wanted to cooperate. It was simply waiting for you to remember who you are. The energetic return doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. It reveals itself in the little things, in the feelings that return, in the signs that reappear, in the decisions that finally make sense. You realize something has come back, but it's not something outside of you. It's you, whole, tuned in, ready. For a long time, they said he ran away, that he hid, that he gave up. But now, with everything that's been revealed, a quiet truth begins to rise. He didn't run. He aligned. What looked like distance was actually vibrational preservation, a conscious choice to step out of what drained him, to reconnect with what nourished him. Because the enlightened one no longer seeks to prove, he seeks to remain whole. The world isn't used to that kind of decision. Most people believe strength is only found in confrontation, presence in insistence, love in staying. But he knew, staying where there's no resonance is the real abandonment. Not of others, but of yourself. And that's why he withdrew. Not to hide, but to reorganize. Not to disappear, but to return in truth. He understood that silence was a calling, and that distance wasn't weakness. It was energetic precision. Now, everything makes sense. The emptiness, the pauses, the absences. Every one of those choices was an invisible step toward a new state of awareness. And today, those who see him with clear eyes understand what looked like escape was alignment. Maybe you've been through that too. And maybe only now are you realizing that you didn't walk away out of weakness. You walked away to remember your truth. And that is courage. It wasn't when he spoke the most, nor when he tried to be understood. It was when he grew silent, when he stopped explaining, when he chose to protect what was still forming inside. That's where his real strength was born. Because real strength doesn't need a stage. It doesn't shout. It doesn't impose. It doesn't convince anyone. The strength the enlightened one carries now is different, quiet, steady, untouched. It's the strength of someone who knows, who feels, who no longer needs permission to exist. Those who mistake silence for weakness will never understand the power of someone who doesn't need to react. Because the enlightened one no longer seeks to be seen. He seeks to be true. He no longer needs to be followed. He only needs to be whole. And being whole, in a world that demands so much from the outside, is a spiritual act. A return to essence. A vibration that doesn't need to prove, only to remain. Maybe now you understand. The kind of strength that truly transforms doesn't depend on voice. It depends on frequency. He came back, but not to the same places, not to repeat the same gestures. He returned with a different vibration, quieter, firmer, and at the same time, more radiant. Because the return of an enlightened one is never loud, it's vibrational. He no longer seeks the old spaces, he creates new fields. He no longer forces reconnections, he only accepts the ones that resonate. His presence has changed, and those who feel it know. Even if they don't understand it, even if they can't explain it, The return isn't to rebuild what was. It's to integrate what he's become. And because of that, his presence unsettles some and heals others. Because now, wherever he shows up, he brings a mirror with him. A field that reveals even in silence what is out of alignment. The enlightened one doesn't need to say he's back, because his frequency announces it before he even speaks. And where there is truth, he stays. Where there is noise, he only passes through. Not out of rejection, but out of discernment. He walks lighter now, more aware. With his feet in the now and his eyes turned inward, he no longer needs validation. Only clarity. And that he already has. Maybe you're returning too, maybe in silence, without others noticing, but with a soul far more aligned. And that is enough. Because the return doesn't need an audience. It only needs truth. Have you felt that calling too? It wasn't time that healed you. It was silence. It was there without rush, without spotlight, without witnesses that the enlightened one built something no one saw. But now everyone feels his inner shield. Every held back tear, every word unspoken, every retreat that looked like weakness was a vibrational brick, a silent code activating, a new field forming. While the world stayed distracted, he was rebuilding in silence. That shield doesn't reject, it protects. It doesn't distance out of pride, but out of wisdom. Because after feeling so much, giving so much, losing himself trying to fit in, he finally understood. The sacred must be cared for. Now, the enlightened one no longer reacts like before. He perceives, he feels, and if needed, he remains silent. Because his field has learned to recognize what nourishes and what only consumes. He's learned to choose who to open doors for and who to keep at an energetic distance. That shield isn't made of hardness. It's made of truth, of clarity, of silence that heals, of presence that watches, and of a strength that doesn't need to explain itself. Maybe you've built yours too, without even realizing. And maybe now, you're beginning to feel that, finally, you are protected. He didn't need applause or explanations. When he returned, he brought something no one could name, but everyone could feel. A different light. A glow that didn't come from the outside, but from within. Born of silence. Refined in absence. Aligned with the invisible, but eternal. The enlightened one no longer needs to prove who he is, because he already lives as truth. He crossed what he needed to cross, released what he needed to release, grew silent where he once insisted. And now, his presence doesn't demand, it reveals. He doesn't shine to be seen. He shines because he became light. A light that doesn't need to be explained, only felt. There's no noise, no triumphant return. There is presence, there is balance, there is peace. And for those who know how to see, there is a vibration that touches you, even before the words arrive. Because he didn't return to be accepted. He returned because he had already become light. Not all messages need to be explained to be understood. Some speak straight to the soul, without ever passing through the mind. And if you made it this far, inside you has been touched. Not by the words, but by the frequency. You're not alone. You never were. Even when you stepped away. Even when you grew silent. Even when no one understood your pain. There were others, somewhere, living the same, feeling the same, crossing the same invisible journey. And now, maybe it's time to reconnect. Not with noise, but with truth. Leave a signal, a trace of your presence, a silent gesture that says, I crossed too. And if this touched your soul, write in the comments, I am one of the enlightened. Maybe someone, reading your words, will feel exactly what they needed to feel. Maybe your silent vibration will be the point of reconnection for another soul on its journey. Because light doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be real. And here, you are among those who feel.